When you reach tree line anywhere in the White Mountain National Forest, there is a sign. Stop. The area ahead has the worst weather in America. Many have died here from exposure, even in summer. Turn back now if the weather is bad. The reason I remember the exact wording is that it always created both excitement at the prospect of doing something dangerous and a knot in the pit of my stomach. I only started hiking because I was bad at team sports. I was a gangly, uncoordinated, only child from Manhattan. I didn't play sports. I read books and daydreamed a lot. Nonetheless, like all other city kids I knew with working parents, by mid-June every summer, starting when I was 8, I found myself in Maine, sharing a cabin with 10 girls at Camp Tapawingo, where excellence at sports was both social currency and measure of ultimate worth. Let's just say that my social currency was very low. I discovered that the more days I spent out of camp on hiking trips, the fewer days I lived in terror of being the last picked on the team or having balls of various sizes thrown at me. There was no competition in the mountains. It was peaceful in the woods, and there was singing around campfires and s'mores. I started to go on every trip offered, and I discovered that I had the only skills required for this activity: a willingness not to complain, and the ability to walk. Over the next 5 summers, I got stronger and more confident, and I could hike distances with a full pack. So when I was 13, the counselors finally deemed me ready for the ultimate privilege, to go on a trip above tree line where the best views are. Now, the mountains of the Northeast are covered with granite boulders, sometimes house-sized. Once you get above tree line, you have to boulder hop, stepping or jumping from one to the other, sometimes for great stretches. Sometimes they're pretty close together, and sometimes they're several feet apart, and you have to leap across. There's nothing to hold on to. You have only your forward momentum and balance. The main rule is keep moving. This is how I discovered that the elements aren't the only thing to fear above tree line. I have a fear of heights, or as I like to say, a fear of death. This became all too clear the very first time my counselors took me with a dozen other girls my age to hike above the trees on South Baldface, which has some of the biggest fields of exposed rock in the state of Maine. Because this was a day trip that didn't involve camping, our group had some serious hikers like myself, and some girls who just wanted to get out of camp for the day and stop at Dairy Queen for a dilly bar on the way home. Dilly bar. The bottom part of the mountain is a bit of a steep slog, and I was feeling pretty good about my stamina relative to the group, which included some of the better athletes. I was at the front of the pack, leading songs as we trudged up the fern-lined trail, which meant that I was the first to get a good look at what lay ahead as ferns gave way to scrub and we reached the tree line. Stop. The area ahead has the worst weather in America. Many have died here, even in summer. My confidence and excitement gave way to dread. No way was I going to make it across this endless expanse of rock without dying. The other girls passed me as they began to seemingly float across the rocks. Turns out the girls who weren't scared of softballs also weren't afraid of boulders. I made it very slowly and very tentatively about halfway through the field before my fear became completely paralyzing. Literally. There I was, straddling 2 big boulders, wearing my big pack, too scared to take the next step and absolutely unable to make my second foot move off the first rock. My brain simply refused to communicate with my legs. I just stood, sweating, trembling, tears running down my cheeks for an entire hour, which felt like 10, reconsidering my apparent death wish. This is recreation? What kind of fucking idiot am I? I saw the other girls who had popped right over the rocks looking on, some with amused impatience and some with bored annoyance, which only added to my humiliation. It was too dangerous for the counselors to simply pull me off the rock once they came back to help, so they tried joking, compassion, tough love, and were pretty much at their wits' end when a huge thunderhead crested the ridge. The worst weather in America. The group couldn't move on without me. With only 2 counselors, we had to stay together for everyone's safety. On exposed rock, we would all become little lightning rods in a thunderstorm. And now I was endangering the whole group, who suddenly stopped eating their trail mix and looked at me in panic. The sky darkened, and the wind whipped around us. Our hair stood up from the electricity. Turns out, the prospect of being electrocuted is even scarier than the prospect of falling to your death. Survival instinct took over. I allowed a counselor to grab my hand and pull me off that rock, and we scrambled for cover, living to hike another day. The crazy thing is, I loved the mountains and the air and the expansive views more than I hated the boulders. And I hated the boulders less than I hated team sports. I kept going back for more, but I was terrified every time until I was too old to return to camp. Some years later, in college, I got a summer job as a trip leader at Camp Tapawingo, taking girls ages 9 to 15 on hiking and whitewater trips. I knew the mountains and how to teach campcraft. What could go wrong? By midsummer, we were ready for the more difficult trails. I was certainly not letting anyone know that I had my doubts about the boulder hopping. And then, inevitably, it was time to take the girls up South Baldface. I had no idea how we'd get through it, but I had no choice, so up we went. Would I embarrass myself in front of all these young girls who looked up to me and thought I would take care of them? And then, there we were at the sign. Stop. Turn back now if the weather is bad. I gave the girls a little head start while I tried to sort myself out. Then I heard a yelp, and I look ahead of me and see one of my young charges stuck. 1 foot on one rock, 1 foot on the other, too scared to move. I hopped over, straddled the rocks, gave her my hand and a laugh and helped her step across. Just like that. Didn't think about it. I did it again and again until we all got to the top. I had something greater than myself to think about, and the fear evaporated. I had no choice in that moment but to grow up, and it changed me fundamentally and forever. The storm I weathered that day on South Baldface was the one in my head. With each step, the storm clouds cleared, and I was rewarded with that amazing view above Treatland.